There's a story posted at Smerconish.com today from the Philadelphia Inquirer that I want people to read. It's a distressing story. I think it's a sad and tragic story about the school system in which I received my public education. K through 12, I was a student in the Central Bucks public schools. I went to the Doyle Elementary School. I went to the Hollycong Junior High School. We didn't yet call them middle schools. And then I graduated from the Central Bucks West High School, class of 1980, by the way. The story is about the cancellation of a school trip. And you might say, well, what's the big deal about the cancellation of a school trip? To me, it is evidence of a trend that I saw coming, at least I think this is the case, about polarization seeping to a local level. Polarization no longer being just the stuff of national R's and D's fighting or on a state legislative or state basis, but now like the polarization that has so poisoned and polluted our national discourse has gone local. And the pandemic has brought out the worst in a lot of people in this regard. Do you remember when last fall I told the story both on SiriusXM's POTUS as well as on CNN about a brouhaha in this same school district where one of the board members, I think vice chair of the board, I've got the clips in front of me, resigned because he said he was getting death threats and needed security. And the way that it ended up on my radar screen is that I read a story in the local newspaper about how the local hospital's chief medical officer had been hooted and hollered when he showed up at a meeting and made the case as to why students needed to wear masks. I'm looking at the Bucks County Courier-Times from September of 2021. At one point, board president Dana Hunter nearly cleared the room after the crowd became disruptive over comments made by Doylestown Health's chief medical officer, Scott Levy. Levy was pleading with the board to follow the mask mandates as cases in the area have skyrocketed recently. And then further along in the story, it says that the 2-minute time limit expired, but the crowd began to grow angry as Levy continued without interruption from Hunter's gavel. Face masks have been a focal point of many impassioned and sometimes vitriolic remarks both inside and outside of school board meetings. This school board meeting was so big they had to put it in the high school auditorium where I went to school because they needed to accommodate a large crowd. And then it makes reference to Board Vice President John Gamble getting the brunt of the anger after a special meeting last Wednesday when the board ultimately rejected an updated plan that could have required masks in schools immediately. Gamble said that he was put into the role of swing vote by the divided board and that his vote not to require masks last week caused online bullying and even death threats. And my observation at the time was to say, if these are the stories that come from the local school board meetings in this community or anywhere across the country, who's going to want to serve in those gigs? They don't pay or they don't pay much, and there will be a vacuum. Good people will say, I'd love to help, but it's just not worth it. Not going to have a death threat or have to hire security. And the vacuum I feared would be filled by the fringe types. Okay, that's all by way of background perspective, things that I've said in the past. So what's today's story that I find distressing about a canceled school trip? The gist of it is, and Maddie Hanna writes this for the Philadelphia Inquirer, that ninth graders at the Tamanend Middle School, I went to Hollycong, we used to play sports against Tamanend back when both were known as junior high schools, but apparently there was a school trip planned to go to the Holocaust Museum in Washington and Smithsonian, and it's now been canceled out of concern as to whether the trip would have been exclusionary for an unvaccinated student or students who are unvaccinated. Here's the lead of the story. The Central Bucks School Board scrapped a planned ninth grade trip to Washington to visit the Holocaust Museum and other sites after a board member objected to a vaccine mandate requirement that she said could exclude some students. Quote, I think we're discriminating against children who are not vaccinated, said Lisa Ciccio, during a board meeting on Tuesday night, voicing concern about COVID-19 vaccine requirements in Washington restaurants and the prospect of children being turned away from using indoor restrooms. Quote, while I love Washington, D.C., she said, she suggested that administrators find an alternative option for the March 31 trip. Frankly, this is a quote, frankly, they could go to Darney Park and learn about roller coasters, she said, referring to the Allentown amusement park. I guess that was a twisted joke. Like, instead of the ninth graders going to the Holocaust Museum and learning about that dark chapter, she thinks they should be on a roller coaster at Darney Park. The board's 7-1 vote to not approve the trip, which would have involved 285 ninth graders at the Tamanin Middle School, spurred confusion and outrage among some parents who questioned the loss of an educational opportunity for students. Others wondered whether additional district trips could also be canceled. Responding to Sissio's comments Tuesday night, a district administrator said that the staff had considered the vaccination question, but that none of the museums or venues that students were to visit required COVID-19 vaccine cards. Sissio said that given the length of the day-long trip, there's kids who will have to use restrooms. Washington says its vaccination requirements do not apply to people who briefly enter venues, including to use bathrooms. Abby Kursky is quoted in this story, apparently has a ninth grader at a different school in the district. Quote, I just want to know why they made that decision. Kursky called the bathroom concern odd, noting that the museums the students would be visiting have restrooms. So let me get this straight. The kids are now going to be denied a trip to the Holocaust Museum because the mindset of the board is to say, well, we don't want to discriminate against the unvaccinated kids. How about if the unvaccinated kids get vaccinated? Or how about if the unvaccinated kids stay home that day so that the vaccinated kids or any kids who want to go and visit the Holocaust Museum and Smithsonian aren't denied that opportunity? To me, it's indicative of a couple of things. One, as I've already said, the vacuum for leadership, even at a local level, being filled by fringe types. And two, those who are playing by the rules, who are doing that which is in society's best interest, wear a mask when it's necessary, get vaccinated, get boosted, are again yielding to the predilections of those who don't play by the rules. And it's just a sad commentary in terms of where I think we are. You know, and to read about it in a school district with which I'm familiar and was educated, it really brings it home for me. Read the story. It's at Smerconish.com. It's from the Philadelphia Inquirer. It's about a school trip, a worthy school trip to the Holocaust Museum that now will not take place. District spokesperson Angela Lynch provided a response on behalf of the board, citing, quote, concerns that the day-long trip to the city, with many attractions, restaurants, and other venues requiring proof of vaccination to enter, would place an unfair burden on students, faculty, and volunteer chaperones. She said the majority of the board was unwilling to place the district's students and teachers in such an unpredictable scenario, with concerns that any student or teacher could be singled out due to the vaccination status. I took a look at both Smithsonian as well as the Holocaust Museum, and neither has any requirement for admission that you show proof of vaccination. Go figure. Read the story, share this with a friend, post a comment. I'll read them all later. Thank you.